Your footage looks clean, but it doesn't feel cinematic, does it? The colors are flat, the mood's missing. We even brought a colorist on for this music video and ended up throwing their grade in the bin. Why? Because it looked flat. It looked lifeless and completely missed the tone we were chasing. So I took it back, built the entire grade from scratch, and turned Boogeyman into something cinematic, textured, and unapologetically bold. Let me break down this tutorial into a couple stages for you. Firstly, I'm going to cover some groundwork, some color philosophy and my experience. And then secondly, I'm going to start breaking down my process into actually coloring the JuLeo Boogeyman music video. So all the timestamps for these chapters will be linked below, but I suggest you watch the whole video so you can get a better understanding of my decision making. If you don't know anything about how Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve applies color, I'll try to keep things simple. In Final Cut, you're working from bottom to top if you're using adjustment layers, or top to bottom if you're applying corrections on an individual clip. I use adjustment layers when I'm trying to affect the whole timeline or several clips at the same time. Most of your clips are going to need some individual treatment for basic corrections, so I use adjustment layers when I want to create the overall mood and vibe, and individual clip adjustments to dial in that mood. DaVinci Resolve works in a very similar way for coloring in a step-by-step manner, so if you're interested in learning more about that, I'll recommend some channels that color in Resolve below or in the sidebar here. I plan on changing over to DaVinci Resolve eventually, but for now I use Final Cut Pro and a combination of LUTs, magnetic masks, color wheels, and a plugin called the Enhancer. So without further ado, what is my color philosophy? Well, let's get into it. We have to start thinking about what our goals are with our color and what standards are we aiming to meet. From a technical perspective, your pure white should be hitting that 100 IRE value, and your black point should be sitting around 0. This is for a Rec. 709 master. You can find all of this information in your waveform. For me, mine average on the high end around a 93, and on the low end about a 3 to 5, which is perfectly acceptable for our purposes. Even my dark scenes that are meant to feel a little moonlight lit still have a high average brightness, so that way you can make out what's going on the screen. A huge inspiration on how this video was even shot was Skepta's music video for his track Nirvana. It's very technically correct in regards to color and tone. It's not really pushing any color into a strong direction that makes it feel like the color is a character in and of itself. Personally, I like to do that. I like to push my colors, and that's just my taste because I feel like it creates a heightened sense of mood and vibrancy, and I think a lot of media is missing that these days. So when I look at other music videos that inspire me based off their color, I think Doja by Central C is a great example, and it's the first one that comes to mind. They aren't afraid of using vibrancy and dense colors and even a little bit of color bleed. For example, in this classic shot here, if it were technically correct, this wall would all need to be one color, but you can see there are very heavy blue tones that are creeping in on this beige wall. Lauren White was the colorist on this Doja music video, along with being the colorist on one of the most vibrant videos that I know, which is Tesla by Lil Yachty. If we look at cinema inspiration, I love Kong Skull Island and Mad Max Fury Road. They're great examples of how color is used to put us into these fantastical worlds. They aren't afraid to get a little creative with how they color a scene. If anything, they lean into that. They lean into how color is just as much of a character in this film as anyone else. At times, their skin tones aren't technically correct if you look at the vector scope, but it doesn't matter because it feels right to the eye. And I love that about these films. So with all that being said, what did we do on the Boogeyman music video for JuLeo? Well, initially I came up with that same reference list and did a little test color grade that I sent off to the colorist so he could get a rough idea of the mood we were aiming for. Let me show you what we got back and compare it to the final version that I ended up doing myself. I'll have them displayed side by side just like this so you can see back to back exactly why we didn't end up using his version. So firstly, you'll see my final version on the left-hand side of the screen and the version we got back from the colorist on the right-hand side. So what exactly is wrong with this color draft? Well, it didn't feel like it was mastered with Rec. 709 in mind. And let me explain why. If we look at the peak brightness across all the clips, it chops and changes a lot. The average brightness is all over the place. The skin tones at times are technically correct since they're sitting on the skin tone line in the vector scope, but if we do a side by side, you can tell there is just way too much red channel saturation and it's making them look sunburned. It takes away from the overall warmth and overcorrects the 3300 Kelvin range I was lighting the scene with. There are also some mistakes that are not just made on an overall timeline base, but on an individual clip level. In some of the side-by-sides I'll show you throughout this tutorial, you'll see I've done a lot of work in trying to do color recovery, because I may initially have overlit the shot, or I may have overcolored it in that scene from a lighting perspective. So in my color graded version, I've tried correcting for that, whereas in the Colourists version, they remain washed out and monotone. So let me break down how exactly I went to fixing all of these issues and coming up with the color combinations that I did. Here are some of my favorite shots from the music video in their own timeline. They're all in their own subcategory I'll be covering, but firstly, we'll be creating the overall mood and tone for the timeline, then coloring without primary adjustments, then coloring with primary adjustments, then coloring my outdoor shots, followed by color recovery for when a shot is poorly lit. To set the stage and explain why my timeline looks this way is because I use a lot of LUTs. There are some absolutely fantastic ones out there if you aren't in a position to use power grades like you can in DaVinci Resolve. But why I use LUTs is because often I find Rec 709 in general, for most cases, has too many colors. What do I mean by this? Well, obviously, Rec 709 doesn't have a creative look in mind. It's the most basic and standard color profile you can get. So what I'm aiming to do with LUTs is compress my colors into 3 or 4 primaries. Often the case with music videos on our budget scale, or just everyday kind of vlogging content, you're not going to have a crazy set design budget where you can craft each building or object or outfit to have the same color palette in your frame. A great example of this is the Grand Budapest Hotel. There is so much costume design and set design budget that goes into making a film like this, and it all matches a color palette set by the director, Wes Anderson. The everyday kind of person doesn't have access to that much set design or costume design. So what I'm trying to do is compress my colors into a 60-30-10 ratio, or a 50-20-20-10 ratio. And if I'm feeling really ballsy, then I'll do a duotone of about a 70-30 ratio. If you want to learn more about color ratios and how they can be used to enhance your videos, I'll link a good reference here that'll break that down for you. Because I want to mimic what it's like to have a multi-million-dollar budget, where the color of the costume and the set all match in the same color palette, I want to add color where there never was any in the first place. So the overall look of the video has a very distinct vibe and tone that make up for the lack of the costume or set design that we had. So with all that out of the way, let's jump to the computer so we can put all of this into practice. All right, let's jump into my actual process. And that starts with figuring out what the overall mood and tone is going to look like across the whole timeline. I begin all my color grading with adding a Rec 709 conversion LUT on an adjustment layer. This is an easy way for me to see where all the contrast and saturation levels sit naturally within the image. This will also vary from camera to camera depending on what you're shooting. But for me, for this shoot, it was S-Log 3 on a Sony a7S III. And with this kind of footage, it works best when you slightly overexpose your image as it retains a lot more of that highlight detail. Secondly, I'm adding a bit of a creative look that will start our compression process. I'll drag another adjustment layer just above the Rec 709. For this video, I used a Kong Skull Island LUT, which works great. You can see right now it's throwing a ton of green all over the image, but we'll fix that later. For now, we're just building the foundation of the mood and the color tone. I found that this LUT is slightly heavy on the orange side of things, which makes sense, but for our purposes, I don't want my skin tones looking so sunburnt, so I'll add a slight color mask where I'm just reducing the saturation a touch in those skin tone areas. Thirdly, let me just add Dehancer in here, which is a paid plugin, but it makes all the difference. This is again where we can compress. They have a bunch of film stock emulations, but today we'll be taking advantage of just the Kodak Vision 3 200T stock, and we'll just bring it down a stop as well. What we'll also be taking advantage of is the expand function, because so far we've done a lot of compressing, so our colors feel a little flat, and it could be a bit punchier. So with this enabled, we're just going to bring down our overall black point and raise our overall white point. We're also going to jump into our film developer section and just boost our colors a touch as well. Now, as we near the end of the color toning, we're just going to jump down to our print options. There are a handful to choose from, and they all provide a different look and feel. But for this video, I found that the Kodak 2383 film print was the punchiest out of all of them. It had the nicest contrast that I wanted, so we're just going to add a little bit more color density, and again, compressing. All right, lastly, now that we've dialed in our mood a little bit more, we're going to add a bit of bloom and halation. Again, they have a bunch of different film stock options, but I chose the 35mm for both. It just felt right. What this is going to do to our image is just add some softness and a bit of a glow to our highlights, so they have a bit more of a radiating atmosphere to them. You can usually do this with a Pro Mist filter that you put on the front of your lens when you're shooting, but I prefer to do it in post because I want to start with a clean image and then start adding all of the necessary filters and things later. And with our halation, what that's going to do is just going to add some red glow, a bit of a bleed around our very brightest highlights. That way, anything that has a contrasting edge, like the white sky next to the darker side of the building, it's going to add a beautiful, just kind of red glow to that edge. You can see in our mansion example here, if we look into the sky, it doesn't really add anything because it's all overcast at the moment. But if we find a bright white edge right next to these blue stones, we see that radiating glow. If you want to learn more about dehancer, I'll link one of my previous videos that I've done. It might help you get a better understanding of it, but for now, that just about wraps up our timeline color tone. And if you're getting lost with how all these layers and effects are stacking on top of one another, I've made a little diagram which will explain everything that I've done and where everything is in the step process. Now we're going to break down the color on an individual clip level. These timeline adjustments, again, were over the whole clip, but now we're going to go into each shot and balance them so we can refine our overall look. What we're aiming for here is consistency. And with the changing environment and all different kinds of lighting, we'll need to keep a keen eye for all those discrepancies. Firstly, let's start with the shots that didn't need any color balancing done to them. These shots are images that, in my opinion, just work perfectly fine with the timeline settings that we have already dialed in. Why I think it's great to start here is because I don't need to do any extra work to push these colors where I want them to go. They were either perfectly lit for the color grade or the camera settings were just perfectly dialed in. That's your ISO, your shutter speed, aperture, white balance. All of these clips were perfect. And because I know these images work, now it's my job to match the rest of these shots to the color tone. So that way these shots that have no adjustments look identical to the shots that have had a ton of adjustment work to them. So if I quickly turn on and off all of what we've done so far, you can see it's throwing a lot of blue, cooler tones in the shadows and the black points in the frame. I'm loving that because so far with how I've lit it, everything is very orange, very golden. So that blue and yellow is very complementary. This is a classic teal and orange kind of grade, which you'll see is quite popular, but I've taken a lot of extra steps to really modify it and dial it in the way I like. You can also see my skin tones are sitting where they need to be based off the vector scope as well. The whites are white, they're not overly tinted in a green or magenta way. If anything, they have a slight bit more warmth to them, which makes sense because the overall lighting is a very warmly lit scene. What is meant to be bright is sitting nice at like a 90 IRE kind of range, and what is meant to be black is sitting in that 3 to 4, maybe even 5 kind of good baseline. There's a good foundation to work from. Let's move on to some of the shots that I felt like needed a little bit more balancing just to feel like they're part of the same scenes. The main objective here is to get the contrast in a good place and the skin tones sitting at an acceptable IRE range. In this case, pretty standard that your skin tone should be sitting between 40 and 70. If you're working with darker skinned individuals, that skin tone should be like 40 to 50, and with lighter complexions, that should be around 50 to 70. For a lot of these shots, it isn't really rocket science. It's just about adjusting the midtones or the highlights to your desired look. I don't want to be losing too much information in the brighter areas of our image. We want to keep that dynamic range where we can. So you can mess with these until it feels like it's pretty balanced and it's looking good to your eye. Where we start to get a little bit more creative with our color grading is when we start to use color masks, shape masks, and magic masks. For example, here with JuLeo at the pool table, we know it's a very brightly lit scene just by the way that light is hitting him on the side of the face. But if we want to make our subject pop just a little bit more overall and also get him sitting at a nicer exposure, what we can do is just bring that harshness down by creating a magic mask. I'm going to add a new color wheel. We aren't looking to remove the mood entirely, just bring back some of our detail. I'm going to track it using the magic mask to our talent. This is a very quick process as well. I love that about Final Cut. And we're just going to bring the highlights down just a touch. So let's darken up the whole shot around our talent just by using a shape mask. I'm firstly just going to start by inverting the shape mask, just so I know everything that's around it is going to be affected. And lastly, just to try and match it to our previous shots a little bit better, I'm going to be adding some more color dynamics in this shot. And what I mean by that is I'm going to add one more color wheel over everything and really pull our shadows back towards the blue spectrum. And now we're getting a slightly more neutral tone, which in our case is adding just a little bit more blue back into the shot. You can see that blue is leaking into the suits nicely, but also our walls look a little bit more natural. They don't feel such orange casted. We're actually getting a lot of that color information back. They aren't nearly being as washed out by that overwhelming orange now. It's still an orange shot, but we're just balancing that in a way that keeps us in that kind of 60-30-10 ratio range. Lastly, let's move on to these silhouette shots, and I want to try and create a huge contrast between our subject and the background. Kind of like our Kong Skull Island reference image here, I want to try and do something very, very similar. So in this instance, it's okay to be losing some of that detail in the shadows here, because that's what's going to give us a stronger silhouette look anyways. So same thing here, we're just overwhelmed a little bit too much with color. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create that silhouette look using a magic mask and our color wheel. Firstly, I'm going to remove all of that saturation that's bleeding into our shadows. This will create a bit of a stronger look. And then we're going to bring our midtones and our highlights down a touch. Now I'm just going to clip the outside of the mask, and I'm just controlling the background now. So I'm going to bring down the midtones again and just even up that mood a little bit. All right, now I'd say these look pretty good. We've brought down some of the overall highlights and midtones just to give us some of that mood back while not pushing our skin tones into an ugly place either. You can see we're still getting a lot of that nice blue and orange, that teal and orange contrasts, that complementary kind of color that we've got going on here. What we'll do as well for this whisking shot, we'll bring down our shadows just to bring that contrast back, because we had a lot of haze in the air, and we're gonna just remove some of the saturation in our midtones. Bump up our highlights just a touch. Let's move to our outside shots. These were some of my favorite from the video overall. For this first shot here, I just want to bring down our midtones a bit. I feel like it's a little too cool. We don't have enough of that kind of complementary contrast of color going on. So I'm just going to push a little bit of orange into the shot. And now it feels like we have a little bit more dynamics going on. And our exposure in the sky is just a little bit too harsh as well. So I'm just going to create a little color mask. I'm going to select the sky here with my eyedropper tool. And now I'm just going to pull down the highlights and the midtones of our sky. And we're going to see that clear up a little bit. We're getting some of that blue back in the sky, which is beautiful. And we could easily just copy and paste a lot of these settings from shot to shot. This one, we don't see too much overexposure in the sky, so I'll just delete that sky adjustment and we'll pull down our midtones. And again, it's feeling just a little bit too cool on this tree branch. So I'm going to add a little bit more in our highlights, drop our shadows, and push a little bit more of that orange into our midtone area. And same thing here with our shot with JuLeo walking through the front of the building. We're just going to really pull down our midtones, a little bit more orange into that, just to even things up a bit. And we're just going to select our sky again with our eyedropper tool, and we're going to really bring down the shadows in our highlights. Just so it feels like there's a little bit more contrast going up there. It's going to bring our blues back very nice. You can see if I just click this view mask situation, you can see exactly what it's affecting. You can see it's anything within this color range, and it's being beautifully brought down without affecting the rest of the shot. Now we have this beautiful shot of the leaf falling, which we did use for one of the title sequences. So to make our title just a little bit more legible, especially when it's being affected by our S-Log conversions, our Kong Skull Island LUT and dehancer, it's a little bit hard to read when everything is so universally bright. So we're just going to bring down the color of our shot a bit. Not only is that going to make our colors a lot punchier, a lot more dense, but it's also going to make that text stand out very nice against our colorful background. Now let's move on to our color recovery. And what do I mean by this? Well, there were just some shots this day that I didn't particularly like the best. It was a fix it in post kind of situation. You can see technically all of the color is pointed on the skin tone line, and it's making for this really washed out, really monotone kind of look. At the moment, I'm not a fan of that. I like duotones. I like bringing these shots to feel like they're living in the same space as the rest of our color grade. Firstly, I'm just going to bring down our shadows a lot, just so we feel like that shadow should be black. or that edge of the spoon, because it's such harsh directional lighting, there should be some black in our shot here. And we're just going to decrease some of the saturation in these shadows as well, just so we don't have it so overwhelmingly monochromatic. And if we look at our vector scope, what are we trying to do? We're trying to remove orange, and removing is also an additive kind of situation. I'll explain what I mean. Similar to how we added a bunch of yellows and oranges to our blue shots, we want to add some blue to our orange shots. And you'll see the more that I add, pulling our vector scope closer and closer to a neutral tone. And now we're getting a lot of that black back in the envelope. Our metals look like metals and our wood looks like wood. It's not this overwhelming kind of sunset orange now. It's looking a lot more natural. You can see with some of these skin tones that they're just so overwhelmingly orange. So we're just going to, this time I might go into my midtones and I'll pull down as much as I can to blue. I'll even change the color temperature a little bit just to add a little bit more coolness to some of our shots. You can see how much of a difference that's made already. It's night and day. We're getting so much color information back. And this only works because I have 10-bit footage. If you are shooting on a camera in 8-bit, you're not going to be able to mess with colors like this and recover them the same way that I have. If you want to know more about bit depth when you're working with color, I'll link some more videos here in the sidebar. But now you can see with just one color wheel, we've brought so much back to our natural pink, kind of lighter complexion skin tones. We've brought back some black in the envelope. Our label is nice and red. Our metals look like metal. Our wood looks like wood. We're in a much better place. Gonna copy and paste this setting from this video to this one, and it is night and day. We're getting so much more color information back. Now, as we move on to our final shots, so this was a kind of dining room dinner setup. There were a lot of candles, a lot of lamps, a lot of spotlights being used for this, and it was all being a bit too overwhelming. I overlit it. So starting with our first shot, what we're gonna do is we're just going to our mid-tone section. I'm just gonna bring some of that blue back. So now the suits are matching up to the suits in our previous shots, which is much better. Our whites are looking good. They don't feel nearly as contaminated by that orange. But the skin tones are still getting a nice kind of warm glow to them from the warm lighting. Again, you might look at a shot like this, JuLeo sitting at the head of the table and think all is lost. It's so overwhelmingly monochromatic. I'm never going to recover it. All we're going to do with just one color wheel adjustment, we're going to pull down our shadows. We're going to increase the saturation just a touch in our shadows. I'm going to bring down some of the highlights because it is a very bright shot, and the saving grace of it all, we're just going to add a lot of blue, and that instantly clears up a lot of our skin tones, and a lot of our blacks are black, a lot of our whites are white. Again, it's a very repeatable process to fix shots like this. It is so easy. Now, to take it one step further, you can see with this kind of silhouette shot, we've got a lot of haze, a lot of blue spotlight coming through on his right side over his shoulder. But his face, his skin, it's sunburnt, right? So what we're gonna do just to mask him out and not affect the background of our color, because we don't want to add blue to a shot that's already got an overwhelming amount of blue, is we just want to make a magic mask around JuLeo. We're going to track that. That's perfect. I think what I'll do first is let me increase the highlights, and that looks so much better. Decrease our saturation so it feels a little bit more normal. I'm going to pull down our midtones a bit, and we're going to put, just in our global section, we're going to pull a lot more blue, and there you go. His skin is cleared up instantly. And what I love to do when I'm working with masks as well, especially for color, I never want to have my mask in the plus 100 because now it looks completely unnatural. There's this weird glow that's happening around. If anything, I want to be doing a subtractive mask. I want that feather to be in the negative 100 because now there's just a little bit of a light wrap that goes around him rather than a glow happening from him. And our final shot, again, you'd think it's unsavable, but I'll prove you wrong. We'll just make another color wheel, make another magnetic mask. And before I even do anything, I'm just gonna negative feather this down to negative 100. Gonna bump up our highlights, going to bring down our saturation and the highlights, and we're gonna push it just to blue. And all of that skin tone is coming back. It doesn't look nearly sunburnt anymore. And now, if we take a quick little scroll, all these shots match so much better, and each scene feels like it's got balance, it's got rich, deep color to it. And that's pretty much how I color graded the JuLeo Boogeyman music video. I've shot over 150 music videos now, so if you are looking for more color breakdowns in some of my previous videos, I'll leave a playlist of all of the videos that I've done, and you can have a scroll through, let me know what you like, and drop a comment down below which one I should do a color breakdown on next. Thank you so much for watching and coming to the end. If you have made it this far, you should probably subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. That'll be all for this video. I'll catch you in the next one.